me kind of undo this to show you what he did for the last 6 months, okay? If you look at this, look at the chart of where it went, where it says 8.639. Obviously, that's in billions, okay? In millions. So if you look at that $300 billion they just added to now 8.69 trillion, okay? That's what the 300 billion is. You go back 5 months ago or 6 months ago to November, we were the same. So whatever he's done the last 5 or 6 months, they just undid. All of these increasing the rates, they just undid by adding $300 billion to the balance sheet. Pat, what are you saying? They undid the Volcker strategy he was taking. Now he went back to the Bernanke strategy. So that's what it looks like, okay? $300 billion added. No one's talking about it. No one's talking about it. And the bigger bank CEOs are coming out and saying, we got $2 trillion. If we're not going to let these regional banks go out of business in the communities, they're going to be safe. And they got another $2 trillion added into it that in case something happens, I know my friends at the big 5 banks, they're not going to tap into that. It's going to be the regional and the community ones. We're not going to let these banks go out of business. What does that sound like? Putting more money into the economy. That's what you call quantitative easing. Where do you think that money goes to? To the big banks, okay? That money's going to roll back to them is what's going to happen. The bigger banks don't care. The bigger banks benefit from something like this, okay, when this happens. But you and I, we kind of have to pay for this, okay? The price goes back to you. And matter of fact, low and middle income, they pay the biggest price because that whole concept, these guys get up on stage, sound so noble like Robin Hood. It's like, let me tell you, it's not fair that the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. You just added $300 billion to the balance sheet that if you have to bail these guys, that money's going to who? Who's that money going to? If you decide to bail out these other regional and communities, where's that money going to? Tell me. Is that money going to go in the hands of the small guy? Is it going to go to the middle income guys? Who's that money going to go to? How about the guy that's making small money? And all of a sudden, we got a new guy that's rich. And look at all this money that they're making. Look how awesome this is. They sound noble, but they're catastrophic. Powell was this close of going through what he was going through. Maybe he increased 5% in 12 months. Maybe that was a little bit too dramatic because when you see what happens here next, it'll tell you a story. But we were so close in taking the Volcker route, which was the Reagan side, to come out of what Carter did. But we went back to the Bernanke route. So now, Bank Term Funding Program. After Silicon Valley, the Fed set up a program to prevent another event like it from happening. Silicon Valley Bank lost money selling bonds before maturity. The Fed has guaranteed credit for bank bonds at 100% of the bond value. You know what that means? Don't worry about it. Take all the risk. We'll bail you out at 100%, at 100% of your bond value. What if it's not worth that? Don't worry. We got you. It's going to be cool. Okay, let me go back to being reckless again. That's what kind of happens. Because it's like the kid that no matter every time he gets in trouble, mommy and daddy bail him out. So that kid becomes a spoiled, rotten kid. And it's because of mommy and daddy. And in this situation, mommy and daddy is the government and the Fed. That's what happens. And these bankers at the top become spoiled because every time they go out of their way to bail these guys out, and they become spoiled little brats without letting any one of these guys go out of business. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and I paid a price for it, and it sucked. Some of it took me a year to recover from my mistake. Some of it took me 5 years to recover from a mistake, okay? 5 years. One of it took me 7 years to recover from my mistake. It's supposed to suck. When you take a risk and you're reckless and you're not responsible, there's a price to be paid for it, right? This is going on in front of our eyes, and a lot of people are sitting around saying, are we going to be okay with this? We're about to find out what happens next. Watch this. BTFP is a game changer. Bank term funding program they just launched. The margin will be 100% of par value. You know what this means? They're going to protect the banks no matter what it is with the bonds. It's lost money. It's no longer worth what it was before. Don't worry about it. We're going to protect it at 100% of par value. Okay? It's so funny. I mean, if the average investor is like going to the casino, playing roulette, playing any game you want to play, and the boss of the casino comes to you and says, listen, don't worry about it. You want to play $100,000? Don't worry. Play reckless. Put $100,000 on 36. Boom. I didn't get it. Another 100,000. Don't worry. 22. I lost it all. Oh my. Another 100,000. What a noble guy this is. Where's that money coming from? Where's that money coming from? It's coming from somewhere. It is coming from somewhere. So where is the risk? There is no risk for these guys. There's no risk. The risk is for you, but there's no risk for these guys. So at least inflation is going down, right? A lot of people are saying, well, inflation is going down. It's great. Look at the numbers. We are below what we were before. And from a year ago, it's fantastic. Everybody should be happy. Really? Is that really the case? Have we always measured success of inflation going down on a 12-month marker or a 24-month marker? Meaning, isn't it supposed to be where inflation is at today versus 2 years ago to say if we're higher or if we're lower? Because if that's the case, inflation is still very high, but they're not selling it that way because I think they just changed something. So let's take a look at this. This is kind of interesting. Every year on February 14th, there's a celebration of love. This February, BLS, which is the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, government, the Consumer Price Index, which we hope you will love, beginning with January 2023 index, scheduled for publication on February 14, 2023, BLS plans to update the spending weights in the calculation of CPI every year instead of every 2 years. What? Yeah, every year instead of every 2 years. Why are you doing that? Well, we're just changing it. Isn't that great? Because it's the power of positive thinking. You don't have to know the negative stuff. Let's just stay positive, and that's how we're going to fix the economy, by us staying positive. Isn't that kind of cool? I don't understand what you're saying here. Yes. So they changed the way they measure it. Here's what it means. The typical way we've always measured inflation is 2 years, meaning where is inflation at today versus where we were 2 years ago. If we measure where inflation is at today versus 2 years ago, which is 1.7%, the numbers are real, scary, versus if you measure where inflation is at today versus where inflation was at a year ago, 7.9%, they get to say inflation is down. So here's how it looks.
So there is a question, though, going on. Did the government start a global financial crisis in an attempt to destroy crypto?
Seems like an outform since we did go down this road. Could you comment a little bit about then the central bank digital currency? It seems like that would be something that would be helpful in situations like this.
Yes, so we issued a paper after much thought and many drafts. We issued a paper, was it late last year? I guess it was late last year, seeking public comment on the costs and benefits of a potential central bank digital currency issued by the Federal Reserve here in the United States, digital dollars. And we await, I think we gave an extended comment period, and we very much look forward to reading those comments. This will be something that we invest a fair amount of time and expertise and hiring people and things like that to try to get it right, but also to understand whether the benefits actually outweigh the costs, which I think is an unanswered question both here and around the world. Nonetheless, it's our obligation to move vigorously to understand the answers to that question so that we can deploy a central bank digital currency if it's appropriate. So would it, in principle, it depends on why people are using unbacked digital currencies. If they're using them to evade, visibility and evade the law, then for us just to have a law-abiding CBDC won't change that. They'll still be able to use those currencies for that matter. The existing digital currencies that again are not backed are really vehicles for speculation. They're not used in payments. They're not a store of value. They're speculation like gold. That's what they're used for. Whereas, potentially a U.S. CBDC would have a wider view. I do want to stress we have not decided to do it, but we do understand our obligation is to really get to the bottom and understand both the technical and the policy issues that need to be answered.
As the name suggests, a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, is a digital currency that's issued by a country's central bank. There are actually two types of CBDC: wholesale CBDCs, which will be used by select individuals and institutions, and retail CBDCs, which will be used by regular folks like you and me. In other words, there will be two CBDC systems, one for the people in power and one for the rest of us. The CBDC developments I'll be discussing today pertain to retail CBDCs. This is because existing research by central banks about retail CBDCs suggest they will have some seriously dystopian qualities. These include controlling how much you can save, how much you can spend, and where you can spend it. If you watched our video about the difference between CBDCs and cryptocurrencies, you'll know that the two are polar opposites. CBDCs allow the government to control your money, whereas crypto puts you in control. You control how much you save, how much you spend, and where. And remember, the ability to truly own your assets and decide how they are used is the real definition of financial freedom. You could have trillions of dollars of CBDC in your account, but you will never be truly in control of that money, nor any assets that trade against CBDCs, which will eventually be most of them. As I mentioned in the introduction, almost every single central bank is working on a CBDC of some kind. The reasons why they're developing CBDCs vary from country to country. For retail CBDCs, the reasons tend to relate to control. For wholesale CBDCs, the reasons tend to relate to convenience and cost. As you might have guessed, most countries are focusing on the development of retail CBDCs. This is basically because their financial systems have become so unstable that the only way to keep them intact is by controlling every transaction in the economy. This has been openly admitted to by some central banks. Now, if you're wondering why financial systems have become so unstable, the short answer is debt and inflation. Most governments have massive debts that they can never pay back. Their only option is to erode the value of this debt through inflation by having central banks keep interest rates artificially low. The problem is that inflation causes lots of social and political issues. More importantly, it erodes the public's confidence in the currency itself. If the public loses confidence in the currency, this risks a foreign currency takeover. This is the worst possible outcome from the perspective of the government. That's because if a foreign currency takes over, the country becomes dependent on the country which issues that currency. One example is El Salvador, whose national currency was replaced by the US dollar in 2001. El Salvador's subsequent adoption of BTC is ultimately an attempt to escape US influence. Now, believe it or not, but this is the same motivation for most of the CBDC development around the world. Countries want to maintain their monetary sovereignty and don't want to be forced to adopt the US dollar, the euro, or the yuan, nor be subject to the conditions that come with adopting a foreign currency. This is why smaller countries have been rushing their CBDC development, while larger countries have been taking their time. It's also why larger countries are more interested in using their CBDCs for other things completely unrelated to monetary sovereignty, such as social and environmental policies. Keep this context in mind as I bring you up to speed on the CBDC development in various countries. Now, what's interesting is that it appears many countries were considering issuing a so-called synthetic CBDC instead of an actual CBDC. For those unfamiliar, a synthetic CBDC is essentially a centralized cryptocurrency stablecoin controlled by the government, with reserves kept at the central bank. If you watched our video about Circle, you'll know that the company seemed to be in favor of this synthetic CBDC setup, and countries also seemed open to the idea. However, this appears to have changed following the collapse of FTX in November. Regular CBDC development has been re-accelerating ever since. This re-acceleration has been apparent in the USA, where politicians and regulators were considering whether USD stablecoins could play the role of a CBDC. For reference, most stablecoins are backed by government debt. This makes them ideal for subsidizing government spending, which governments obviously like. Although some politicians and regulators are still interested in the idea, the aftermath of FTX has turned the focus back to standard CBDCs in the US of A. Case in point, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York announced a brand new CBDC pilot with major commercial banks just a few days after FTX collapsed. In December 2022, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston completed its own CBDC pilot, which had been conducted with the help of MIT. I'll quickly note that there's been speculation that Algorand will be chosen to host the US CBDC, given that the project's founder is a professor at MIT. Well, I suppose we'll find out in time. In any case, in February this year, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco posted a job advert looking for developers to work on a CBDC pilot. A couple of weeks later, a former White House advisor revealed that the current US administration is explicitly pushing for a CBDC and trying to get rid of crypto. Earlier this month, the US Department of the Treasury announced it would be expanding its CBDC research, specifically examining technical issues and public interest related to both wholesale and retail CBDCs. Unfortunately, no timelines were provided on when a digital dollar will actually be developed.